Expedition early, and Tulloch knows it could happen again. What's your biggest fear for this expedition?
Hurricanes coming out of the Caribbean, you know, up the Gulf Stream and up along the East Coast. If they're coming, it's just like troops marching.
And finally tonight, we will show you something else that is truly incredible. A 20-ton section of the liner's portside hull, the largest relic ever recovered from this deep ocean, marking a milestone in the history of Titanic.
Raising that piece of hull would be a Herculean effort, a mission of man and machine over the elements, and a mission fraught with danger.
Still ahead, the mission that could make history or cost these scientists their lives. Also, the search for the grand prize. How will they try to bring up the piece of the hull that's been teasing them for so many years?
You have to be careful with the ocean, and you can't just guarantee things.
How do they plan to do the impossible when Raising the Titanic, a Dateline Discovery Channel exclusive, continues?
Shout it out.
You're looking at the high-tech wizardry that's behind this deep-sea mission, the submarine Natil. Its job is to free float to the bottom of the ocean amid water pressure that could kill its occupants in an instant, then capture pieces of a giant ocean liner decaying on the ocean floor, and then bring it all to the surface relatively intact. Impossible? Don't tell that to this group of explorers. Dateline reporters and cameras are there in the North Atlantic to record their dangerous mission. Bob McEwen on what it takes to raise the Titanic. Bob?
Jane, when Titanic sailed from Southampton in England back in 1912, she wasn't only hailed as the biggest and grandest ship ever built, but also as the most technically advanced, a triumph of human technology. Well, now, an armada of modern technology is gathered here in the middle of the North Atlantic to bring Titanic to you in a way you've never seen before. You're about to meet some of the people behind that scientific wonder. From a high school teacher in South Carolina to a former French Navy frogman, and a whole array of marvelous machines. They know exactly where Titanic is. The trip to it is only 2.5 miles long, but fewer people have gone there than have flown in space.
On the front, you have all the main equipment. You have all the light.
No one knows Natil better than P.H. Nargeolet.
You have some video camera, still camera. There is a viewport, of course. You have 2 manipulators.
In this French mini-sub, he spent more time on Titanic than anyone ever has, including the ocean liner's captain.
For me, the Titanic is a magic wreck. You know, it's probably in my dream, you know, it's the best wreck in the world.
But there'd be no dreams here without Natil. Most of what you see on the outside, this yellow shell, is just flotation and ballast. The critical part is what's on the inside, a tiny cockpit, just 7 feet in diameter, designed to support human life in the most inhospitable place on Earth. It's been called an inner space capsule. In here, the self-contained breathing system is the same one astronauts use. The hull is solid titanium, 4 inches thick. And though the pressure outside is the equivalent of hundreds of millions of pounds, because this is a sphere, that tremendous weight is distributed evenly over every square inch of Natil. But just one tiny crack in this hull, and the capsule would implode in a fraction of a second, crushing everyone inside, literally to dust.
If we have a leak at this depth, it's like, you know, a bullet, or if you have an explosion, it's the same thing, you know, same thing.
Oh. Despite the undeniable danger, P.H. Nargeolet has made almost 100 dives in Natil. It was while creeping along the ocean floor 11 years ago that Nargeolet, who saw the world as a French Navy frogman, saw something through Natil's porthole that he says changed his life.
The first time I dove on the Titanic, it was in '87, and I remember very well. And suddenly we saw the hull of the Titanic herself, and we climb, and that's the emotion is coming, you know. We are thinking to the people, we are thinking to the ship, to the tragedy, to everything. And for me, it was a very strong moment, very, very strong.
For years, the search for Titanic, and now the exploration of the wreck site, have been a proving ground for cutting-edge deep-sea technology. But since this expedition began, it's been beset with problems. The inherent danger of working in the middle of the North Atlantic is just the beginning. The story of this unmanned shows that way out here, whatever can go wrong usually does.
Magellan's mission today is to dive 2.5 miles down to the bottom of the ocean and travel 86 years back in time to the bow section of the Titanic, to the very spot where the great ship sank on that April night back in 1912.
Fire up, and you're getting wet.
Magellan's going to come down like an elevator to a point about 100 meters to the east of the bow rack and drive to the forepeak, come up to the railings, run along the railings to look for any additional iceberg damage that may not have been seen before.
Magellan's 3-mile-long lifeline to the surface becomes tangled, and as if that weren't enough, the ship it's attached to, the Ocean Voyager, loses all power.
Give him slack and take him down.
Finally, Magellan is hauled back up to the surface. The completion of its assignment delayed again.
Okay, 100% down.
Another of the objectives of this expedition is to explore inside Titanic, to go to places that have never been seen since the night the ship went down. And as good as she is, at a weight of more than 3 tons and a cost of over $1 million, Magellan is simply too big and too valuable to risk on that kind of dangerous mission.
We still should have a lot of buoyancy compared to before.
Enter Bill Willard and his ROV called T-Rex. That stands for Titanic Remote Explorer.
Okay, I want to go forward.
His kid named it. When he wasn't teaching high school science, Bill built it in his living room. T-Rex got its first test in the Seneca, South Carolina municipal swimming pool. Hey, it was the deep end.
I guess you could say I'm fulfilling one of my favorite dreams. A long time ago, I began a trail studying Titanic, and it became more of a hobby. It became a passion.
Bill's a Titanic buff from way back. When he saw the pictures from Nautiel in 1996, he wondered why they never went inside the wreck. Then he met mission leader P.H. Nargila at a Titanic exhibition.
We talked a little while, and I said to P.H., why don't you have a small disposable ROV that would go inside where you could get some great, fabulous footage? He said, one does not exist. Do you have one? And I said, well, if we make one, will you use it?
But unlike other Titanic enthusiasts, it's not first-class cabins that Willard wants to see.
I would love to go into third-class areas where they carried their lives with them.
On a ship with so many fabulously wealthy, influential people, you'd go to third class.
If you look at the steerage section, that's where the real people were, the working-class people, the people that packed up and gave their lives and to come to America to start all over again.
But because of continuing technical difficulties, T-Rex has yet to make that intrepid trip inside the Titanic.
Here's our camera system.
So for now, Bill Willard's creation sits on the deck of the Ocean Voyager, waiting for technology to catch up to his dreams.
Considering exactly where we are, you might well be wondering, how are we getting these pictures to you from the bottom of the middle of the ocean? Well, if Bill Willard ever does get T-Rex up and running, it'll be one end of a broadcast system that's a triumph of technology all its own, and that's never been tried before.
Pictures from T-Rex, perhaps even inside Titanic, would be fed back to Magellan outside the wreck. From there, the TV signal travels along 3 miles of cable up to the surface and onto our production ship, Ocean Voyager. Then the signal gets sent to this thing, which looks like a big white beach ball perched on top of the ship. Inside is a dish that bounces the signal to a satellite that sends it to New York City, which broadcasts it right into your own living room. Meanwhile, Magellan is back in the water. Its problem solved, at least for now, sending back pictures.
When we come back, what the Titanic wreckage reveals about the people.
Coming up, the untold stories of the Titanic.
In the 2 hours and 40 minutes that Titanic has between the collision and the sinking, there's time for drama to play out here. Incredible human drama, self-sacrifice, wisdom.
Plus, It's the mystery of the hull. How will these scientists try to raise it to the surface?
On paper, this works.
On paper, it works.
In the middle of the North Atlantic?
And what clues lie inside to the mystery of the Titanic? When Raising the Titanic, a Dateline Discovery Channel exclusive, continues.
Though the scope and technical challenge of this mission are mind-boggling, the hope is not only to recover the marvels and material goods that were lost, but to learn something about the lives, 1,500 of them, that were destroyed when the Titanic went down. The wreckage and artifacts like these open a door on what life was like for those people who lived and died almost a century ago. What they touched, what they valued, what they brought with them on that fateful voyage, what they took with them to their graves. What's it all say about them? What's it say about us today? Here's Lynn Cannon.
On the ocean bottom, the wreckage lies silent. But if these objects could speak, what tales would they tell? Did lovers see their last sunset from this rail? What goodbyes were said as a lifeboat was lowered from this crane?
It is so immense, so beautiful, so devastated. You are seeing things that you only read about, and to actually see where all of these events took place is a profoundly moving experience.
For historian Charles Haas, every dive to the Titanic wreck site is a journey through time. A trip back 86 years to a tragedy that tested people's faith and ended an era when many thought anything was possible.
When you see the ship, you say almost automatically, oh my God.
Haas looks past the twisted metal of the wreckage, through the portholes, to the people on Titanic, those who survived and those who did not. For the passengers, this is where it all began.
These are the B-deck doorways. When you boarded the ship at Southampton in England, you would essentially have gone through these doors, and the purser would greet you there.
The Titanic set sail for New York and into history on April 10th, 1912. 2,200 passengers were on board, including a handful of some of the world's richest people, like John Jacob Astor. Astor and his young wife, Madeline, married just 6 months before the voyage in this ballroom at the Astors' elegant summer home in Newport, Rhode Island.
You have an amazing collection of people on the Titanic, everything from the humblest immigrant to the wealthiest millionaire. And somewhere within that range, we tend to find human beings that are a lot like ourselves.
Last week, this kitchen pot was found in the debris field, a simple reminder of life on board an extraordinary ship. In fact, a meal on the Titanic meant the finest in dining at sea. Titanic was the ultimate luxury liner. The accommodations were magnificent. To many, the symbol of that elegance was the breathtaking grand staircase. 86 years later, this chandelier is a reminder of that elegance, now being devoured by the sea, which claimed Titanic on April 14th, 1912. That day, Captain Edward Smith received several ice warnings, but continued full speed ahead. Looming ahead in the darkness of the moonless night, and as seen here in last year's Oscar-winning movie Titanic, with lookout Frederick Fleet's warning, "Iceberg, right ahead!" the drama was underway.
We are hovering over the fallen forward mast, and you see the remains of the crow's nest. It was here that lookout Frederick Fleet spotted an iceberg at 11:40 p.m.
If they had spotted the iceberg 15 seconds sooner, they probably would have cleared it completely.
In 1996, Paul Mathias's mission was to determine the exact nature of the iceberg damage. What he found was not a 300-foot gash, but a series of razor-thin cracks. Later, metal testing revealed dangerously brittle iron in rivets recovered during the dive. The rivets' heads were sheared off by the iceberg, and they popped out, opening up slim cracks between hull plates.
And those separations are very, very narrow, possibly as narrow as a finger. With a small hole.
Discovery's scientific team calculated that the greatest ship in the world merely glanced off the iceberg and was doomed by the equivalent of pinpricks. With pristine holes, but no rivets, this metal plate found just last week supports the conclusion that the rivets popped out.
Bring your head 90 right.
Later in this mission, researchers hope to use remote-controlled cameras to maneuver deep inside the hull, taking pictures of the iceberg damage for the first time. Will the mystery finally be solved beyond a doubt? According to Haas, the collision with the iceberg was so gentle, many passengers had no idea the ship was in danger and decided not to board the lifeboats.
The great tragedy is that fully 500 seats are empty. 500 people lost their lives for no reason other than a lack of information about what was going on.
The orders were to save women and children first, but many women refused seats in the lifeboats. Ida Strauss, wife of the owner of Macy's department store, was one of those women. Whatever her fate, she would face it with her husband. The Strausses would die together. For those who did get in the lifeboats, this is one of the cranes that lowered them to safety.
You come up close to it and you can see that the brass mechanism, it gleams in the light of the sub.
During the ordeal, upbeat ragtime music from Titanic's band comforted passengers. The band would play until the very end, finishing one last hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee," before the ship went down. As Haas guided the sub's crew around the wreckage, other stories from so long ago came to light.
Among the greatest heroes of Titanic's story, I think, are the postal workers. As the water began flooding, the men's only thought was to try to rescue the mail that they had been placed in charge of.
With a sense of duty hard to imagine, the postal workers tried to drag the mail to higher ground, but were overtaken by rising waters. This great hole marks the spot where the 5 men died. They were Titanic's first victims. This boiler powered Titanic's massive engines. After the collision, stokers worked valiantly to provide power to the doomed ship. Stoker Frederick Barrett was lucky. He was later assigned to a lifeboat as an oarsman and survived. In the movie Titanic, the story of forbidden love between Jack and Rose and soaring scenes like this on the ship's bow came straight from director James Cameron's imagination. This is the view today on Titanic's bow. On these decks, there were many real-life stories of lost love on that tragic night.
We're looking now down at the third-class area, the so-called forward well deck.
From this section, the third-class deck, passengers like Gerda Lindell and her husband Edvard could enjoy the sunsets.
There are so many stories that touch your heart, and the Lindells are another example.
The Lindells were a young couple from Sweden looking for a better life in America. On the night of the tragedy, as the ship's stern rose out of the water, the Lindells were thrown overboard. Edvard would not survive. Someone tried to pull Gerda aboard a lifeboat, but she too was claimed by the sea.
The gold wedding ring that was on her hand dropped into the lifeboat as she fell back into the water.
And later recovered.
The Titanic has been called an exquisite microcosm of class distinctions. Those distinctions remained even when the ship sank, as first-class passengers got priority treatment.
All away!
But were third-class passengers actually locked behind gates?
Let us out so we can have a chance!
In the blockbuster Titanic movie, we see third-class passengers prevented from leaving the third-class section. Is there any truth to that?
We have considerable evidence to suggest that the gates that separated third class from second and first were not lockable, that they simply were a latch that you would lift and the gate would open.
Right there. Yeah.
For Haas, solving the riddle of the third-class gates is one reason he's here now. He says exploring the wreckage and recovering artifacts must be done before the Titanic slowly disintegrates at the bottom of the ocean. From telegraphs and teacups to a clarinet and love letters, he thinks preserving the artifacts is the best way to give meaning to the lives that were lost.
To the next generation, it has to be the artifacts that speak. So long as younger generations become intrigued with Titanic's story, she and the people on her are not going to be forgotten.
But what about the grand prize of this mission, the chunk of hull that was lying separate from the main bulk of the Titanic's wreckage? When we come back, the painful history of trying to bring it up.
Coming up next, it was another time, another shot at history.
As the ship continues to deteriorate, this piece may very well end up being the only surviving piece of the Titanic.
What lessons did they learn from the first attempt 2 years ago to raise part of the hull? Plus, will success finally be theirs this time around?
It says here it hasn't moved.
Will all the effort, all the heartbreak finally pay off? When Raising the Titanic, a Dateline Discovery Channel exclusive.
In its all too brief life, the Titanic was a world unto itself. It still is, but now it's a world 2 miles down. You're looking at a remarkable view from the deck, captured by a remote-operated camera on the bow of the Titanic. If Leonardo DiCaprio had played an actual passenger, he might have stood at this very place to proclaim himself king of the world. It's a breathtaking find, but it's not the main object of the explorers' desire. What they're really after is the chunk of the hull that sits apart from the main wreckage, the piece they tried to raise 2 years ago before it slipped away, back down to its watery grave. Once again, here's Bob McEwen with the story of that fateful mission and its lessons.
Mother Nature has a way sometimes of doing one of two things. Either she will kill you in a smitten second, or she will put the pressure on you to perform, and you either perform or fail.
In many ways, in August 1996, it truly was Mother Nature against George Tulloch. The mission, to beat water and weight and to raise a piece of Titanic.
What we decided was find a piece of the hull itself that when you put your finger and pointed at it, you said, that's Titanic. Not the whistles, not the compass, not the bell.
And George Tulloch knew that it would take some major bells and whistles to pull it off. Other parts of Titanic had been raised before, but never anything this big. The hull piece is 23 feet long. It weighs 20 tons, about the same as 14 full-size cars. It's a huge chunk of Titanic's hull, including portholes, sheared off in the sinking and found at the bottom of the sea near Titanic's stern. The plan was this. First, use the mini-sub Nautil to attach lift bags to the piece. Filled with buoyant diesel fuel, those bags are supposed to act like balloons, rising all the way back up to the surface, carrying the piece with them. A line from the recovery ship will be attached, and the piece will be hauled aboard. And the plan worked, at least to a point. The lift bags and the big piece arrived at the surface.
Well done.
But the celebration would be short-lived. A storm started wrestling with Tulloch over the hull piece.
Not enough, one line.
Ropes and nerves were strained to the breaking point.
This rope is crap. This rope is crap.
They couldn't keep the hull piece in their grasp, and finally it sank back to the bottom of the sea. For George Tulloch, whose personal mission is to help all of us better understand the storied vessel lost on that night to remember, this would be a night to forget.
Honestly, I felt like I lost a member of my family. So we had to just respect the sea and ask if we could come back another day, maybe.
2 miles down, attached to the hull piece, was a small metal sign. I will come back.
Is this piece of history doomed to lie forever on the ocean floor? The final chapter in our story when we come back.
Coming up next, it's the final showdown, man versus the forces of nature. Pulling history out of the deep and bringing a legend back to life. Plus, the most personal remembrance possible of a night of tragedy.
Slowly, slowly, with hardly a ripple of that velvet sea, she sinks out of sight.
The death of the Titanic from one who was there. When Raising the Titanic continues after this message from your local station.
Coming up tonight at 11.
Yes, definitely.
They tried once before and failed, beaten back by the forces of nature. Now, a second attempt to raise a piece of the Titanic's hull, which they believe will tell them a lot about the mighty ship and the lives that were lost on it. And maybe even answer once and for all why the Titanic sank. Once again, here's Sarah James.
A big piece of Titanic's hull sits on the ocean floor, much as it has for 86 years, silent, mysterious. It has become the stuff that dreams are made of.
Ever since the Titanic sank, inventors have been devising schemes to recover it, from suggesting giant magnets to filling the hull with ping pong balls and floating the ship to the surface. Ideas so far-fetched, one person scoffed, raise the Titanic? Why not just lower the Atlantic?
On what day are we done with the big piece preparation?
George Tulloch trusts technology. He's out in the North Atlantic trying once again to raise that big piece of Titanic's hull. He has with him a team of French oceanographers, led by engineer Pierre Valdy. He's back again with his plan to use 5 giant lift bags to raise the hull piece. This time, the bags are stronger and have more lift. But we are in the middle of the Atlantic, and 1,000 things can go wrong. Faith in technology is one thing that caused the Titanic wreck to begin with. On the French Navy vessel Nadir, the bags are filled. The submarine Nautil, as with 2 years ago, moves the 5 bags over to the big piece and hooks them up. The work takes several days. Nautil also studies the big piece. Ocean bacteria have attacked the steel. This may be George Tulloch's last chance to bring the piece to the surface. The salvage ship Abbé steams into the North Atlantic from France, ready to hoist Tulloch's prize onto its deck once the lift bags have brought the big piece close to the surface. Nautil goes below to make sure the lift bags are ready to float up.
Voilà.
The bags are in place, and the big piece should start to come up. But will it?
I'm here on the Abbé, where they're getting ready to attempt to hoist the big piece. To do that, they'll use powerful winches and this massive A-frame. This is exactly the point where 2 years ago, everything went terribly wrong. But this time, with a different boat and calmer seas, they're hoping the second time will be the charm.
It says here it hasn't moved.
But back on the bridge of Nadir, the news from the bottom is not good. Computers show the big piece is not moving from its home on the Atlantic floor. For all their calculations, they didn't figure on this. The big piece is standing straight up because it's stuck in the mud, and the mud doesn't want to let go.
The situation of the piece is not like last time. The piece is stuck in the mud vertically.
On paper, this works.
On paper, it works. That's correct.
In the middle of the North Atlantic?
You know, you have to be careful with the ocean, and you can't just guarantee things.
The plan now on Nadir to launch a 6th lift bag in the morning to add more pull against the mud. But 86 years later, the ocean is once again giving technology a tough time. The weather forecast calls for heavy seas. But the ocean may have relinquished one of her secrets this day. The expedition now believes it was wrong about the big piece and where it's placed on Titanic. At first, they thought it was an empty first-class suite on the starboard side. But after taking a closer look this time, they now think the piece is from the opposite side of the ship, Suite C86, the rooms of Mr. and Mrs. Walter Douglas from Minneapolis. He was an heir to the Quaker Oats fortune. He and his wife, Mahala, had gone to Europe to celebrate his retirement at age 50.
They'd only been married for 3 years, and they were very much in love.
Dateline found their grandniece in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She says Titanic has become part of her family's history.
The reason why it made such an impact on us was because of the grief on one hand and how it affected everyone, and also because it's a love story.
As Titanic was sinking, Walter insisted his wife go off on Lifeboat 2 without him.
She said, you know, why do you have to stay behind? And to me, this is the way he would want to be remembered, is he said, the only honorable thing to do is to stay behind with a man.
Mahala hoped he survived, but then his body was recovered from the Atlantic. Mahala lived until 1945 and is buried with her husband, Walter, now in Iowa. For the team, it makes bringing up the big piece more poignant, more real. But will the ocean care? The next day, it seems there's an answer. No heavy seas, no rough weather. It's a good day for the work ahead. I go into Nautil myself and watch the sub attach the 6th lift bag to the recovery line. That's it. I get a peek at the big piece, perhaps the last look underwater. And seeing those ghostly portholes, I can't help but wonder what their thoughts were that last night. On the Nadir Bridge, everyone waits to see if Bag 6 has done the trick. Suddenly, computers show that the lift bags are beginning to rise. 20 minutes later, the bags pop up out of the ocean, but no one knows for sure what that means. Is the piece attached, or have the bags simply snapped loose? On the Abay, George Tulloch waits anxiously. The tautness of Abay's thick cable is a sign the 20-ton piece is on the other end, like a fish at the end of a line. This would be the largest piece of the most famous wreck in history ever to reach the surface. But will it? Then, suddenly, a chain surfaces.
Okay, enough.
But Tulloch stops the hoist rope. Now divers go below to make sure the piece is attached and check on its condition. Divers make a dangerous plunge through lift bags and lift lines and come upon the big piece still in one piece.
Forget them, let's go.
On the surface, the hoisting begins again.
Allez.
And slowly, seemingly weighed down by its tragedy, the piece breaks through the surface and into the sunlight for the first time in 86 years.
Just make sure that they're not going crazy.
But the work is far from over. Men on launches move in to strap the big piece so it doesn't swing wildly on the deck. One bad slam into that A-frame and the brittle steel would shatter.
Tell them to watch that glass. How do you say glass in French?
The launches back off for now. The hoisting starts for a third time. The tension is nearly too much for Tulloch.
I can't take this, you know.
It's completely out of the water now and swinging toward the deck.
Come on, where's the ropes? Where's the ropes? Why isn't this rope tight? Now, okay.
But the long bottom end of the piece is giving Abay's crew problems. And as the piece is finally laid onto the deck, the long end bends up dramatically, as if it's the ocean's last comment before giving up one of its rarest prizes. For the team, it is a stunning victory over the North Atlantic. For George Tulloch, it is the stuff of dreams come true.
This was all we were ever going to get. I didn't want to lose it, you know.
And perhaps the last word belongs to someone not alive to see this, someone who last saw this steel in all its glory on the finest ship man has ever built. Mahala Douglas wrote a poem about her night on Titanic, a porthole to the past through the shattered glass of room C-86.
Darkness comes to her suddenly.
The huge black bulk stands out in silhouette against the starlit sky. Slowly, slowly, with hardly a ripple of that velvet sea, she sinks out of sight. Slowly it lost its force, thinned to a tiny wisp of sound, then to a pitiful whisper. Silence.
After the expedition, the piece of the hull will head to Boston, where it will be closely examined. There are still a lot of unanswered questions about the Titanic, its short life, and its horrible demise. The expedition has found a substantial part of the wreckage and even brought up some of it, as we have seen. But now science must pick up where exploration leaves off. What can the wreckage tell us? Is the Titanic decaying too quickly for us to learn anything lasting from it? Will we ever know for sure why the ship sank? Could it ever happen again? Join Discovery Channel on Sunday night for a 2-hour special, Titanic Live, the latest from the expedition to the ocean floor. And if you'd like to find out even more about this exciting mission, the whole recovery effort and artifact restoration, you can log on to our Dateline website at www.dateline.com.